In an old marketplace, at the far end where the streetlights flickered and most shops had long been forgotten, there stood an abandoned horror store called Dark Whispers. The signboard above the entrance hung crooked, its faded letters barely visible beneath layers of dust and peeling paint. The glass windows were cracked like spiderwebs, and from the outside, no one could clearly see what remained inside. Only shadows that seemed to shift when no one was looking directly at them. Years ago, the shop had opened with strange decorations, eerie masks, antique dolls, and dark paintings that unsettled even the bravest customers. At first, people visited out of curiosity, laughing nervously as they explored the shelves. But soon, rumors began to spread through the marketplace. Shopkeepers whispered that odd sounds echoed from within after closing time. Soft footsteps, faint crying, and the slow creak of the wooden floor. Some claimed the air around the store always felt colder than anywhere else, even in the peak of summer. Gradually, customers stopped coming. The owner disappeared without explanation, and the doors were shut forever. Yet despite being abandoned, the store never truly seemed empty. Late at night, when the market fell silent and darkness covered the narrow streets, a dim light sometimes glowed behind the cracked windows, as if something inside was still waiting. People said a mysterious woman appeared there at night, and no one knew where she came from or why she chose that abandoned place to wander. The first person to speak about her was an old fruit seller who stayed late to count his earnings. He claimed that as he was locking his cart, he saw a tall, shadowy figure standing in front of the closed store, Dark Whispers. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the dim streetlight, but then the figure slowly turned its head toward him. He described her as wearing a long, black dress that seemed to flow even though there was no wind. Her face was hidden behind a dark veil, and her presence made the air feel heavy and cold. After that night, others began sharing similar stories. A security guard swore he saw her reflection in the cracked window, even though the street behind him was empty. A young boy said he heard a soft whisper calling his name when he passed by after sunset. Some believed she was the spirit of the store's missing owner's wife, while others thought she was something far older and darker, tied to the strange objects once sold inside. What frightened people most was that she never appeared during the day. She came only after midnight, standing silently near the entrance, as if guarding it, or waiting for someone brave enough to step inside. Her face was always hidden behind a dark veil, and that was what terrified people the most. No one had ever seen her true expression, not even for a second. The veil was not like ordinary cloth. It seemed thicker, almost like a shadow itself had wrapped around her features. Some said it moved slightly, as if something underneath was breathing slowly and unevenly. Others claimed that when the streetlight flickered, they could see faint shapes shifting beneath the fabric, but whenever they tried to focus, the image blurred and disappeared. Children who passed by the market during the day dared each other to peek through the cracked windows at night, hoping to catch a glimpse of her face, yet none ever succeeded. An old shopkeeper once whispered that he had seen her lift the edge of the veil just a little. He refused to describe what he saw, but from that night onward, his hair turned completely white, and he shut down his shop within a week. People began to believe that the veil was not meant to hide her identity, but to protect others from whatever horror lay beneath it. Some said her face was burned, others that it was not a face at all, just darkness. The mystery of what she truly looked like became more frightening than any rumor, because sometimes the imagination creates monsters far worse than reality. Anyone who entered the store never returned the same, and that was the warning repeated in hushed voices throughout the marketplace. At first, people didn't believe it. They thought it was just gossip meant to scare children and attract attention. But over time, strange patterns began to emerge. A group of college students once dared each other to step inside the abandoned shop at midnight. They went in laughing, recording videos on their phones, joking about ghosts and old horror props. When they came out 20 minutes later, their laughter was gone. One of them refused to speak at all, staring blankly at the ground as if he were listening to something no one else could hear. Another kept muttering that the mirrors inside did not show their reflections correctly. Within days, they stopped coming to the market altogether. Then there was a delivery boy who entered the store on a bet. He returned pale and shaking, claiming the shelves had rearranged themselves behind him and the door had disappeared for a few seconds. After that night, He avoided crowded places and said he could still hear soft whispers calling his name when he tried to sleep. It wasn't that people vanished every time, they changed. Their eyes seemed distant, their smiles forced, as if they had left a part of themselves behind in the darkness of dark whispers. One day, a journalist decided to uncover the truth, determined to prove that the stories surrounding dark whispers were nothing more than superstition and fear. His name was Armin Halim, a young investigative reporter known for exposing frauds and debunking urban legends. When he first heard about the mysterious woman and the strange changes in those who entered the store, he dismissed it as mass hysteria fueled by rumor. To him, every mystery had a logical explanation, and every ghost story hid a human cause behind it. The more the shopkeepers warned him to stay away, the more curious he became. He began interviewing locals, recording their accounts carefully in his notebook. He visited the marketplace during the day, examining the cracked windows and the rusted lock on the door. He even researched the store's history and discovered that its owner had vanished without leaving any records or family behind. Instead of feeling afraid, Armin felt excited. This was the kind of story that could make his career. He planned to spend a night inside the store to gather proof and finally silence the rumors. Confident and skeptical, he announced publicly that he would enter the shop at midnight. The marketplace fell silent at his declaration, as if even the wind knew he was making a terrible mistake. At midnight, he stepped inside the store, carrying nothing but his camera, a flashlight, and an unshakable confidence that logic would protect him from fear. The marketplace behind him was silent, the last streetlight flickering weakly as if warning him to turn back. The old wooden door groaned loudly when he pushed it open, the sound echoing unnaturally through the empty street. For a brief second, he hesitated at the entrance, feeling a sudden drop in temperature, as though he had crossed into a different world. The air inside smelled of dust, rust, and something faintly rotten, like forgotten memories left to decay. He switched on his flashlight, and its beam cut through the darkness, revealing shelves covered in cobwebs and strange objects draped in white sheets. His footsteps echoed heavily on the wooden floor, each step sounding louder than it should have. He tried speaking into his camera, narrating confidently, but his voice seemed swallowed by the thick silence around him. As the door slowly creaked shut behind him without being touched, Armin felt the first crack in his certainty. For the first time, he realized that whatever waited inside was not just a story, it was watching him. Inside, old dolls and broken mirrors started moving on their own, as if awakened by his presence. At first, Armin thought it was only his imagination reacting to the darkness and silence. His flashlight beam trembled slightly as he swept it across the dusty shelves. The dolls, once neatly arranged, now seemed tilted at odd angles, their glassy eyes reflecting the light in a way that made them appear alive. One doll's head slowly turned with a faint creaking sound, though there were no visible strings or mechanisms attached to it. Armin froze, convincing himself it must be loose wiring or rats scurrying behind the walls. But then a sharp cracking noise split the air. A broken mirror hanging crookedly on the wall began to shake violently. Its shattered pieces did not fall. Instead, they shifted and rearranged themselves, forming distorted reflections of Armin that moved a second too late. In one fragment, his reflection smiled when he did not. In another, it appeared to be whispering something silently. The wooden floorboards beneath him groaned, as if something heavy was walking just out of sight. The dolls slowly turned their heads toward him together, their tiny faces expressionless yet accusing. The store no longer felt abandoned. It felt awake, aware, and deeply amused by his fear. Suddenly, the woman appeared behind him, floating silently above the ground, as if she had always been there, hidden within the shadows. Armin did not hear footsteps, nor the sound of fabric moving. Only a sudden, unbearable cold that wrapped around his spine like icy fingers. The flashlight in his hand began to flicker wildly, its beam dimming and brightening in uneven pulses. Slowly, almost against his will, he turned around. She stood only a few feet away. Her long black dress drifted unnaturally, though the air inside the store was still. Most terrifying of all, her feet did not touch the wooden floor. She hovered inches above it, motionless yet somehow closer with every blink of his eyes. The dark veil covered her face as always, but now it seemed thinner, clinging to whatever shape lay beneath. Armin tried to step back, but his legs felt heavy, as though the floor had trapped him. His breath came in short, panicked gasps, forming faint clouds in the freezing air. The mirrors around the room no longer showed his reflection. They showed only her, standing behind him again and again from every angle. In that moment, he realized she had not just appeared. She had chosen to reveal herself. In a whisper, she said, "Now you will stay here forever," and her voice did not sound like it came from just one place. It echoed from every corner of the store at once, soft, distant, yet painfully close to his ears. The words seemed to slide into his mind rather than travel through the air. Armin tried to speak, to ask who she was or what she wanted, but his voice refused to obey him. His throat felt tight, as if invisible fingers were gently but firmly wrapped around it. The temperature dropped even further, and the faint mist of his breath thickened into a cold fog between them. The veil over her face shifted slightly, not lifted, but moving as though something beneath it had smiled. The broken mirrors on the walls reflected the same scene repeatedly. Armin standing frozen, the woman floating behind him, her presence growing darker and more solid with each second. The dolls on the shelves began whispering too, tiny, overlapping murmurs repeating her words in distorted tones. "Stay, stay forever." The floor beneath his feet no longer felt steady. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. And in that suffocating silence between her words, Armin understood that this was not a threat, it was a promise. The next morning, the store was locked again, and the journalist was never seen again. As the sun rose over the quiet marketplace, shopkeepers arrived one by one, pretending that the night had been ordinary. The crooked sign of Dark Whispers hung exactly as it always had, unmoving in the pale morning light. The wooden door was firmly shut, a thick layer of dust undisturbed at its base, as if no one had entered for years. Armin's camera and flashlight were nowhere to be found. At first, people assumed he had left early to prepare a dramatic report. But as hours turned into days, and days into weeks, his absence grew impossible to ignore. His apartment remained untouched. His notes ended with a single unfinished sentence. The police searched briefly but found no signs of forced entry or struggle inside the store. Officially, he was listed as missing. Unofficially, the marketplace already knew the truth. Late at night, when the streets fall silent and the wind moves through the empty stalls, some claim they see two shadows behind the cracked windows now. One is tall and veiled. The other stands stiffly beside her, as if still learning how to belong to the darkness forever.